right. With that last few clicks, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Garrett Griffin. I'm a National Solutions Specialist with the Empire Group in Australia. And with me, I am joined today by Andrew Jolly, a Principal Consultant with the Empire Group, specializing in information management.
Good morning, all.
And today we're going to be talking about information management using SharePoint. Specifically, we will be covering the following three key areas. We'll be talking about some of the native benefits that we have in SharePoint with the native platform or unamended platform with regards to information and document management. We're going to be spending quite a bit of time on key learnings that we have taken with regards to strategy and implementation or planning for records management implementations. And then we're going to swing back to the platform side at the end. We're going to talk about the ecosystem or landscape of potential extensions there are to the SharePoint platform that can really aid when we start to talk about information management within the organization. Our format today is going to try and hold to about 45 minutes. We are fielding questions in the GoToWebinar question bank. I've been advised there will also be a short survey at the end if you would like to provide some feedback. And of course, the recording will be made available in follow-up emails, so forth and so on. So before we really dive in, as you might expect, we want to establish a few definitions and make sure that we all understand the same terminology. One of the concepts that we work with very, very heavily when we talk about information management generally is this concept of life cycle, information life cycle. It applies equally to documents or non-document content, but what we're referring to is the fact that we should approach information management projects with the understanding that information or documents will have a lifespan. They are created and captured. They may pass into sharing and collaboration and publication. They're being managed with or without features such as version control, etc. This control can actually extend into much more formal control when we look at quality management systems, policy and procedure stacks, and we start to introduce the concept of document control or document review, which is often cyclical. And in all of these cases, we sometimes have information that for compliance reasons or for retention and exposure reasons, exposure and disposal reasons, needs to be managed more formally still, sometimes even to the point of compliance with specific standards or legislative requirements. And so enter the realm of records management. One of the clarifications that we like to start with all of our clients is a clear definition of management versus control versus records management. Often when people are taking a platform-based approach or they're taking even, dare I say worse, a technological approach to solving these business problems, we often hear this terminology mixed and mingled with no clarity between them. We define document management as all those activities within the document or information lifecycle that relate to people creating, capturing, sharing, working on together, collaborating to generate the material, and publishing and sharing that information out to each other. Where control comes into play is where we start to express a need to track variations, renditions, versions, where we need auditing over the sharing and the publication, where we need review cycles, or where there is some other degree of formality that is required with regards to managing that body of information for the organization or for the benefit of any stakeholders. And then, of course, records management is where we, in fact, have either a from creation concern to manage that information in a very formal and compliance standards consistent way, with an idea that there will be retention and disposal concerns at the end of that process, or that an item of information can enter that process at any point in time. So that kind of covers the basic definitions that we work with as we approach the different kinds of IM project that might come about. Now, moving over to SharePoint. Native SharePoint has actually got, particularly as a version 2013, quite a lot of capability. Some people are aware of this capability. Some people are using SharePoint and may not be aware of some of the features that actually exist, particularly with regards to document management. So right out of the box, SharePoint brings us this concept of a document library that inbuilt has major and minor versioning capabilities. It's got check-in and check-out and submission approval capabilities. It's got the ability to interact with documents via templated content types, click and upload, drag and drop upload, and for those old-timers out there who just love their Explorer views, we can even still interact with it in that manner as well. We have a very rich landscape of capabilities in SharePoint with regards to managing content types and associated metadata, either locally or globally across our SharePoint farms. Managed metadata services is a rich set of capabilities that influences search, it influences navigation, and of course gives us a very strong capability to organize our information in ways that we can't do with file shares. We've also got a very granular security paradigm that can be tied to existing security frameworks and identity frameworks, or can stand alone, and can go even down to item level, not that we necessarily recommend that under most circumstances. We've got inbuilt into SharePoint 2013 a very rich and easy-to-use sharing mechanism so that end users who have this authority don't necessarily need to have a PhD in technology in order to share an item out and ensure that the security mechanisms are set correctly. We've also got capabilities such as document sets, the ability to bind multiple items together with shared metadata so that we can deal with matters and cases, for example, or projects in a sensible way and keep those bodies of information together. We do have in SharePoint, of course, native workflow capabilities. Now, we might call these rudimentary, but you can actually get quite a lot done with the native workflow. And out of the box, it's very easy for the administrator and even power users to put simple approval workflows and things together, and notification workflows together. Getting into the more sophisticated realm, many people aren't aware that native SharePoint has inbuilt information rights management capabilities built right into those libraries. There are some external dependencies that have to be configured to enable that, but there is a rich set of IRM capabilities built in. We have lifecycle and routing management rule capabilities built right in, and we've got into that landscape, we've got other features as well. We even have the ability to generate unique IDs at a site collection level within SharePoint. So right as we take the shrink wrap off, as it were, we've got a rather robust set of capabilities to start to manage information, particularly information held in documents, in ways that we just can't accomplish using file shares or other cloud-based storage mechanisms, for example. Now, it's worth mentioning as well that depending on how we have integrated our SharePoint landscape with the Office suite of tools, we also have a very rich co-authoring and co-review capability. For anybody who hasn't tried this using SharePoint 2013 and Office 2013, highly recommended. Multiple users can participate in editing and reviewing a document simultaneously. SharePoint and Word take care of all the heavy lifting in terms of managing those updates and managing those versions of the document as well. And of course, for situations where our document management needs to have an offline component, we now have OneDrive for Business, which gives us a range of options for synchronizing our content down to our local drives or from the cloud, as the case may be, and gives us yet another way to interact with our information. An IM discussion in SharePoint can't really be rounded out without also talking about the other features that often don't get mentioned because we're focused on documents. SharePoint provides a very rich set of enterprise content management features, publishing workflows, publishing pages, and a number of other related features, supporting features that shouldn't be overlooked, as some information is more relevant to be held in what we like to dub living documents or as pages. We have an opportunity using wikis and publishing pages to create very rich information environments for organizations, particularly in the intranet context, that can be managed as published information rather than as physical documents, and they're not to be overlooked. Now, supporting all of this, for anybody who doesn't have any exposure to SharePoint and wouldn't know this, there's also a number of other app types or list types in SharePoint that can support the way we work with our documents and other unstructured information, ranging from calendars and task lists to wikis to, there's dozens of them. There's dozens of applications. And of course, there's a framework now for even more applications to come to life or will be developed inside of your landscape. So all of these work together when we talk about information management to help us center our thinking around that which is document, that which is list, that which is page, And binding it all together in the SharePoint landscape is search. Search has evolved dramatically in SharePoint over previous versions. SharePoint 2013 brings a completely rewritten search engine that brings together all the best features of prior search instances, including fast search, and creates a set of search experiences that go, people often ask us, can I have a Google-like search? I would argue SharePoint beats Google search, simply because the number of tools, and we'll take a screenshot of these in a moment, the number of features that we have to refine our searches and to determine the relevance of the information that's being presented in our search results goes even further than the typical Google experience. Rounding out the IM capabilities in SharePoint are a set of inbuilt records management features, particularly good when we're talking about retention and to a lesser extent disposal. A lot of people aren't aware that we actually do have features we can enable in SharePoint for in-place records management, features such as legal hold. We have a reasonable set of capabilities around developing information management policies and routing policies. We have inbuilt templates for discovery centers and record centers that can be used, and a range of other features that can be exploited before we look at extension. I'm not sure if Andrew wanted to add anything with regards to the ARM features in SharePoint before we look at extension.
Yeah, just the main observation I had with the ARM features that are inbuilt that the sort of management of those ARM features tends to be something that you're doing kind of right across the farm. You're configuring IM policies, and which are the things that route things for at the end of their life cycle. Those things tend to be configured in many different places, as well as in a central or centralized record centers. Third-party products can bring that together in a more centralized way with a lot more power above, on a lot more capacity to control all those things. So the RM features certainly will help people if they're after a sort of a preservation side of things. Just sort of, I want to retain this, I want to keep a hold of this stuff. But when you need to start getting into complex retention, disposal against schedules and so on, it may be that you start to see shortcomings, and that's where we start to enter into the ecosystem of third-party products and so on.
Which we'll come back to in a moment.
Yeah.
Just a few screenshots taking into account that some of our attendees today may not actually have any exposure to SharePoint or SharePoint 2013. Just to quickly touch on the document management experiences that come out of the box. So we have, first of all, a very clean and open user interface in SharePoint 2013, vastly improved over previous versions. It is a very Office-like UI with the introduction of the ribbon, of course, and a great deal of integration with Office document types as well as others. SharePoint retains all of what it has always had in terms of configurable views on lists and document libraries, the ability to work with content types, manage metadata, to assign those as new item templates into document libraries, and how it introduces drag and drop. Niceties such as being able to email links rather than attaching items to our email when we're going to communicate, easy sharing buttons and easy sharing management, and a range of other niceties that have come to life, particularly in SharePoint 2013. When we talk about shifting from traditional file share document management into SharePoint, at this stage, there's really no comparison. Once users get their head around the idea of working in a more metadata-driven context, as opposed to a container or folder-driven context, the world begins to open up, and the user experience is vastly, vastly improved, and our capabilities to manage our information is vastly improved. And just quickly touching on the search experience, this is but a rudimentary example of the default search experience with vertical refiners, keyword search, horizontal refiners that are all configurable. We have presentation displays of the results, configurable display templates for the result sets. We can go even further with degrees of configuration and customization to create groupings. There are added configuration features such as best bets and rankings and other capabilities inside search. And importantly, search is not confined in SharePoint to SharePoint content. Sources can be defined from just about any source you can imagine. Relational databases, line of business systems, web content, old versions of SharePoint. It's really an opportunity for people to consolidate the search experiences across numerous information assets in the organization. And we're always quick to point that out and very excited about that. Shifting gears now towards records management. I'll add my own qualification to this before we let AJ loose on you. These concepts can equally apply to document management projects, document control projects, and RM projects. They are really good concepts to get our heads around before we approach any of these types of implementation, because IM in general, although it is a very wide landscape, does operate along some pretty common themes based on human behavior, based on organizational patterns that have existed for thousands of years, and based on common needs that can be found across projects and across organizations. So with that, AJ is going to talk to us about 8 key areas that we've decided to pull out today as what we feel that are the top line considerations when approaching, in particular, RM projects.
Yeah, that's right. It's sort of it's a very, as Garrett said, it's a very big sphere. The 8 things we're pulling out here are based on our experiences and where we see value needs to be dedicated to. Start with the first one here, the getting clarity of direction on your future state. Normally, if you're planning a records management strategy or any information management activity, there's generally this sort of a business case made, perhaps in a project and so on. But you really need to take a look at that because to define the future state and what the success looks like, these things will be very useful moving forward when you're trying to interact with your stakeholders and your sponsorship from executives and so on. They're going to ask, what's the point of this? Why are we doing this? And it needs to be put into terms that they understand. So do spend some time articulating those goals. It might help starting with questions such as, articulating things around having a system. For example, having a system that supports the management of records will enable us to fill in the blanks. Be very clear about what that future state is going to be. The next aspect there is to look at information, of course. So what is to be managed and how? Be quite articulate about what you are trying to manage, at least at a nice sort of a higher level. If you're going to manage everything, take a moment to define what everything is. If we don't take time to understand what we're trying to manage, it is possible to miss key considerations. Their information is not necessarily always sitting in the one system. You may be trying to manage stuff that exists in other systems, and you need to be aware of the implications there about how you're going to either bring stuff in or reach out and manage that information. So take time to catalog or understand the domains of information you're going to be managing, and then of course how you will be managing those. One of the key aspects of records management is having a retention and disposal schedule, or a retention and disposal authority, which dictates the types of information you have and how long you need to retain those for, including the trigger dates. You may not have one of these. Some of you may have one. Some of them are often out of date. The important thing is it doesn't necessarily have to be set in stone. There is a natural inclination to try and get this thing right before you start on your journey. Yes, it does help to have a complete retention disposal schedule if you can, but if you can't, that's fine. The truth is, over time, it's going to change anyway. Legislation changes often change the retention disposal schedule, so you need to sort of be ready to adapt to those changes over time. So it's okay to start with something that's more or less fully formed, but you don't necessarily have to stall trying to get everything perfect along that line. Definitely have someone who will represent it, who will take it on board and be able to make decisions around it as well. And as it will be used to help structure and your system to manage those records effectively. Do delve into the legislation or standards or policies that your organization is subject to. If you're in health or you're in education or you're in different types of industries such as those, very specific retention compliance needs. So do look to the guidance that's there. Sometimes it's not very prescriptive, and that's obviously sometimes for a reason. But you will need to be ready to make a call on those any places that are ambiguous. You need to be ready to make those calls as to how long you're going to keep things for. So we'll be making a lot of decisions as you move through this process. So it's good to start that now. Don't try not to leave this till implementation time. Do devote attention to it early. You can't probably start too early with this type of area. The next aspect we thought we'd highlight here is operation. This is defining how you organize, structure, and skill your people in order to maintain that future state we talked about in the first aspect there. So yes, this is very much at the end of the project you move into operating the system. Don't wait till the end of that project to discuss this. You need to be discussing this well up front. Again, right at the start. Start the conversations early. You won't have all the answers, but it's important to start talking to the people that will be operating your information system, your records management aspects of your system very, very early. The little equation there I've put underneath the circle there is implementation. Without them, operation leads to that degradation, and it can be very costly in time and resources to pull yourself out of a system that has sort of gone by the wayside. You don't want to find yourself doing the project twice. Yeah. So do get involved in the operation early. Find out how you currently manage IT services in your organization. Get some business ownership against it. Get some technical ownership against it, and start those conversations early. Change management. This is really about getting the organization from A to B. Traditionally in IT, very good at getting systems from A to B, but the industry is not, or it's starting to become more aware of the human element in these systems, and are realizing that it's actually often more important to make sure you're getting the organization, the people in the organization from A to B as well. There's nothing worse than a system that isn't used at the end of all your efforts. That you might have a successful project, but you might have a terrible system at the end of it, and a lot of organizations don't want that. So change management is a very important concept. It's not just communications and training sessions. It is multifaceted. It's about senior stakeholder support for the project, about getting them behind you, educating them into understanding what you're about to go through or what you're going through. So do pay attention to that. And start that again early. All of these things we made consideration today to pull out. All these things we pulled out are things that you can begin now, not necessarily waiting on technology to be present or a system to be ready. These are the things you can start to meditate on. Technology, pulled this one out, of course, because it's an important one, obviously. The main point here, or the main takeaway, is to get technology in place early. Record systems are really they're really single technologies, and they're rather an orchestration, or often an orchestration of multiple technologies, and they can be highly nuanced and how they interact together. And different stakeholders require different understandings of how they fit together. So the technical services people that might be managing your system will have a different need for understanding than someone who's in the business declaring physical records, for example. So it's important to get people's hands on that technology early in a controlled way to make sure that they are aware of the changes that are coming, have a chance to experience the technology and really bring them along the journey. Sometimes it's a bit scary for them. Sometimes there's a realization that this is a big deal and it's going to take a lot of work. But let's not avoid those things. Let's get those conversations happening at the start, not at the end, when they're more likely to disappear if it gets too hard. So be able to, in terms of technology, be able to walk the skeleton is often what we call it, and that is be able to chain together everything in a little environment there where you can show people and have people understand what it is to put information into a system, move it through its life cycle, and what it's doing at the end. It's invaluable to have that resource early in your cycle. Don't wait for deployment phase. Get this in early. Next one is architecture in terms of building a stable but scalable architecture. You may need to develop a brand new architecture that is a logical architecture, a taxonomy to store things in, or and another taxonomy to categorize by. You may need to redevelop this, you may need to develop it, you might need to remediate this if you're doing an upgrade or a redesign. The key here is you need to really be striving to develop an architecture based on principles that will scale. Architectures that are grounded in functions, that is the what of the business, or what you do, rather than the organizational structures and naming conventions and hierarchies. Functionals architectures are far, far more resilient to change than the latter. Organizations are highly mobile. It seems that they're getting more. It feels like organizations changing faster and more frequently than ever before. Teams renaming, people's jobs titles renaming, which tells a team that they must rename, and all that sort of thing can cause chaos to an information environment if you are using those sorts of terminologies to organize content. And you might not think it's a big deal, and you might think you can change things, but when you've got a system that's shepherding record documents right through to retention and disposal, you often have complex rules, complex engines to assess the content to make that happen. And if you've got the system changing underneath itself all the time as it's responding to small organizational hierarchical changes, because that's how you've chosen to organize that way, you're going to have a lot of remedial activity in terms of managing those records. You may need to resubmit things when they change. You may need to rewrite rules. You may have a very big moving feast on your hands, which isn't necessarily untenable, but it's going to take time. It's going to take resources to manage, and your single lone records manager may not be able to do that in the behind the scenes all by themselves. So architecture is important. We definitely encourage to organize around a functional type of approach rather than an organizational hierarchy.
I was just going to chime in there as well, AJ. One thing that we experience frequently is a tendency for organizations, particularly those who are just beginning their document or RM journey, to think in terms of singular taxonomies or classification schemes, looking to create the end-all, be-all classification scheme that will suit all purposes. The key message that we like to bring home right up front is it's okay to have multiple classification systems, each to their own purposes.
Good point.
You're going to have classification schemes that drive navigation in your intranet or your tools. You're going to have operational navigation. You're going to have functional navigation that is often related to operational. You're going to have classification schemes that are purely for the purposes of meeting compliance obligations or conducting your recordization processes that have absolutely nothing to do, in some cases, with the functional behavior or the day-to-day work in progress. And trying to coalesce all of these into a single BCS, as it were, is a mistake. It is important to understand that they are separate from each other. They can overlap, they can interrelate, but they are separate. And thankfully, the Managed Metadata Service in SharePoint gives us the tool to manage multiple taxonomies for each of these purposes. That's what I wanted to add there.
No, it's a very good point, and I think it highlights the potential intricacies around structuring these environments and having the ability to have poly-hierarchical taxonomies, and that's probably another webinar to stage. I think at some stage, Gary. I think you've just signed us all up. We should canvass the crowd and see if that will be of interest to anyone. Perhaps that could be a future thing we do. The next aspect there is one about migration, and migration is, to sound very cliche, it is a journey. It is very much a story of people, process, and technology. It's not to be underestimated. Migrations are different when it comes to moving around unstructured content to other content. So, for example, maybe some of you have been part of an email migration before, going from, I don't know, Lotus to Exchange or Exchange to Exchange. Those sorts of migrations are very, very defined. It's very simple to pick up a database and attach it to a new one technically. It's not complicated. It's not complex. It's complicated, but it's not complex. Moving unstructured information, piles of information that have no structure at all, other than the myriad of structures people have put in place inside folder systems or old record systems, bringing those across into another system in a structured way is very different. So try to, early on, get stakeholders to recognize that they are fundamentally different things. It's more of a transition than a migration, actually, or a transformation in many situations. The action here, I think, is that we like to encourage people is to examine the migration scenario about bringing content across. So earlier in the aspect to talk about information and understanding what's to be managed, take one of those domains of information that you've decided upon, for example, how you might manage project information, and go through the scenario of how that might move from file share through to the new system you're going to be putting in place. And through those steps, assess the people, the technology you may need, and the process. What happens at the end of the migration? How will you shut off the old destination? There's a technical consideration there. There's also a people consideration there, or a change management consideration there. How are you going to tell them that you're turning something off? How will you deal with it if there's a very disgruntled business unit who feels not consulted there or can't move? They've got special tools that need those drives or those old systems. So understanding that migration, that pathway, and you will probably have multiple pathways that you need to consider. That is a work that you can start to do early. Again, you may not have all the answers, but it is very good work to start getting people on board to understand.
There are also some key learnings that we can take from other areas of expertise, even going back to old ETL or data integration techniques. First and foremost it is very important to treat migration as often a sub-project or a separate project. It needs its own isolation in many cases from the main activity in order to give it the right attention and diligence that it needs. It's often something that needs to be approached in an incremental or time and materials fashion due to the nature of the number of things that can go wrong or interrupt that process. It's also advisable to have a dedicated amount of energy spent on planning your migration. This isn't about creating tomes of technical documentation, but it is about understanding sequence, about accepting that there will be potentially multiple tools or pieces of software involved in your migration. Some of it may be custom, and that there will most definitely be a need to assume a rinse and repeat process with migration. And a very important decision, as AJ alluded to, as to whether the migration is important to be done in one shot, or whether it's important to break it up into batches, or whether even still, those batches might actually take quite a bit longer and trickle feed into the new system over time. And those are all key decisions that migration will benefit from.
And I think that actually leads into this last aspect of transition, which is fitting in the sequence to suit your business. It might seem very nice on a project plan to have migration taking place for 2 months and everything will be across. It doesn't. We never really see it happen like that. Your business needs to be. You need to consider the business that you're in, the intensity that different business units are subject to throughout the year. For example, you might be a financial services organization, and end of year is a no-go zone for you, for your groups if you're trying to migrate them. And conversely, after financial year, you might have a very big vacuum that you need to, that you might have either an opportunity to start migrating those specific divisions, or you might still have a problem because they might all go on leave after the financial year's over. So you really need to think about, in the transition side of things, how will your business, how you will help the business move, and how that will affect your sequencing, and whether you can move them in batches, in a staged approach. It's not uncommon to take months to move the organization through slowly adopting the system. So do spend some time thinking about your transition profile and what might work, what might not work for your company.
I'm just going to take a moment, as the typing of answers has been called out as a bit disruptive to the audio stream. We're just going to call out to some of the remaining questions that haven't been answered for the moment, that we'll wrap that up again towards the end. There is one question that we haven't gotten to, just on the RM components. Not sure if you've covered this or if it's coming up, but does RM fit in, how does RM fit in with SharePoint 2013? E.g., is it a plugin? Is it an extension? What have you? We're going to talk a little bit about this in the context of the tail end of the presentation in a few moments. But just to put it very broadly, there are records management capabilities that can be turned on within a native SharePoint installation. Most of those came to life in the 2010 instance forward. However, those, even under the best of configuration, are not going to bring you compliance with standards. And this is where we look to either integration of SharePoint to an existing EDRMS that brings you standards compliance, or we look to extend SharePoint with particular products that bring you up to that compliance level. We'll leave that there for now and come back to it. There has been a request that against these 8 areas we provide a little more advice about the kinds of resources that would be involved in each of these areas. The one thing I wanted to call out to what AJ's offered us today is there is a common thread here, and not to oversimplify it to people processing technology, but we're beginning to see how clearly important the people aspects of this are. The traditional divide in RM projects is between IT, business, and records managers. And one of the important things to try and get our heads around is how to begin building a quorum of those 3 representative types right from the start, and to begin to break down their individual needs, and to use good external advice as well as the power of the platforms and technology that we're dealing with to help each other understand that we don't have to have conflicts in our needs, that in fact we can achieve 99% of what everybody's looking for in a way that still brings transparent records management through SharePoint. It's another webinar unto itself as a topic, so I'll leave it there, but we just wanted to call that out. So in order to preserve enough time, we might just scooch through the remainder of the extension slides, and I'll go ahead and carry those, and then we'll come back to the stream of questions that are pouring in now with regards to RM. There's some great questions. We'll definitely make some time to come back to those.
Thanks for sending them through.
Now, with regards to extension or customization, as the case may be, one thing we'd like to present is a view to looking at the total cost of ownership versus the return on investment to help us decide the path we need to take. And 4 of the areas that we'll look at relate to this continuum, if you will, of out-of-the-box versus light configuration versus extension and third-party extension of SharePoint versus customization. As we can see in this first chart, the representation is that the precision in addressing our business needs becomes higher as we approach customization. And that would make sense. The flexibility that we have with customization can allow us to really get down to brass tacks in terms of solving our business problems in exactly the way we want. When we start to look, however, at the total cost of ownership, naturally there is also an increase as we go down that road or through that continuum, with customization generally being accepted both upfront and ongoingly to represent the greatest total cost of ownership. And sometimes, of course, on the customization side, these costs aren't apparent right away. Over a period of time, just the changing landscape can mean that there are additional costs in reskilling and also in making adjustments as different line of business systems begin to interact with our customizations, what have you. Now, when we shift gears and we start to look at the return on investment that each of these different approaches offers us, we see a very different pattern. In terms of looking at the return on investment out of box, because it doesn't necessarily meet our business needs very closely, it also has a very low return on investment. We see a better return on investment from configuration and extension opportunities, but the return on investment is offset for customization by that incredible cost of ownership. What this defines for us is that when we look to solve business problems beyond out of the box, we have a sweet spot in the form of configuration and extension before we ever look at customizing anything. And I should add, when we talk about configuration versus customization in the SharePoint context, we do not necessarily include client-side scripting, for example, or page layout or CSS work as customization. Those are low enough level and harmless enough in terms of the supportability of the platform that they can be treated as configuration activities. And so we have a tremendous capability before we ever have to actually write back-end code, as it were. Now, to talk about the extension landscape, We're not going to focus on any one particular partner or product today. The key points that we wanted to make to you are that there are a range of tools that significantly improve the native capabilities, either generally or in specific areas for SharePoint. For example, One-Place Mail offers us the ability to manage our mail assets, including attachments, right within our Outlook experience through to our SharePoint, where our records management system is either waiting or might be integrated. We have a number of different metadata-based security tools, such as those from High Software and Titus. It's worth mentioning the workflow products, K2, Nintex, each horses for different purposes and different scales of project. But when we start to manage a lot of information of a lot of different types across a lot of different stakeholders, the ability to develop workflow without the need for technical designers or technical skills increases. And our return on investment improves when we have the ability to start to manage those process automations and those simple document workflows or even complex document workflows using visual tools and tools that can handle the load and give us a variety of options for how we design those things. So K2 and Nintex are both great options to look at. And the landscape goes on. When we talk about auto classification of content, there's some wonderful little products like Layer 2's knowledge management tool that provide a degree of auto classification based on a set of rules. You can take that to the nth degree and look at products like PingR, which will actually do document interpretation in order to provide or suggest classifications for you. And of course, all of these products work together to tell the story about how we're creating, classifying, moving, sharing, approving, destroying, and recordizing our products. Specifically with regards to records management, as we've touched on, SharePoint itself is not a compliant-based system. It has a set of features that are quite useful and can get you so far down the road. But when we look to the richer set of records management capabilities, we either need to extend with a product such as RecordPoint, which begins to open up our physical and non-physical and traditional records management capabilities through to retention and disposal behaviors, or we need to integrate. And there are a number of integration types and capabilities available in the marketplace for all of your traditional EDRMS and records management systems. One that we would certainly call out, although it is yet to be demonstrated in the Queensland marketplace where we're based, would be integration with TRIM. And that's a story that is worth looking at if people are already well invested in TRIM. So that's a brief touch on those things. What we might do now is come back to the questions and then drill back into some of the areas. I see that we've hit our 45-minute mark. We might just tail the remaining 15 minutes out addressing some of these conversation points. So we'll pull the next one. In the planning slide again for RM, there was a discussion about resources. Let's go to that one first. I'll just back up if everybody forgives me. So, AJ, would you like to talk to us about some of the learnings you've taken, particularly in recent experiences with Queensland agencies with regards to the resourcing model involved?
Yeah, definitely. So it's not a case of necessarily running out and hiring a whole big team. In fact, in many ways, it's not the ideal thing at all because, especially with records, there is a lot of tacit knowledge, a lot of knowledge already inbuilt within your resource base in your organization, so it's very important to leverage them or leverage those users. Now, there will be things that they will not necessarily have the skills or the knowledge to do, and that's where you can support them with. That's how we obviously interact with a lot of organizations, is to support those people and take them through knowledge transfer, skilling them up, filling holes where there might be a technology deficit, or helping with migration, or certainly helping with change management. And often we work with change managers within a resident change manager, and we'll kind of run cover with them or run behind them to help them understand how to orchestrate change within their companies. So resourcing is really about, I'd say, first step would be to look at who you have on the ground within your organization now. who you would have access to, be realistic there, and then of course determine where you might need some supporting skills. Look, the big emphasis we like to make is when we're involved with projects, because we would recommend, or we really support this idea that you are taking yourselves through a journey of getting enough skills in-house to manage and maintain and operate as much as possible the day-to-day running of things like SharePoint management, administration, records management, record center administration, and so on. So I hope I didn't skirt the question too much, but
there's actually a clarification that's just come through.
Yeah.
I should have clarified which stakeholders outside the RM team are the key points of contact within the organization, e.g. architecture, technology.
Certainly from certainly business representatives, I think you definitely need to get on board. They might not be technical people, but you need their input, especially when it's often their information that you're going to be exerting control into. So that's from the information side of it. Get the dialogue happening there. From my architecture, depending on the organization, you may have architect resources. Sometimes the word architecture is a broad one. It can often be confused with system architecture to information architecture to usability experience designers and stuff. So just the architecture resources you would need there are people that would understand the SharePoint logical architectural models. What is a site collection? What is a library? What's a site? What's a list? Knowing when to use those and what arrangements, that's sort of the profile of the person you would need. We often support people in that capacity or bring that expertise in and then hopefully transfer that knowledge to our customers. And then from a migration point of view, definitely technical services people or your IT department. Someone in there is a very useful resource. They're often very, very multi-skilled. I know they generally are locked in a room in a wee cave, but we do find there's a wealth of knowledge there, and usually they're more than happy to be up for a challenge. We really enjoy working with technical service people, and we particularly enjoy connecting them with the business and getting them to work together. So you do need a bit of a spread of resources, and I think that comes back to that point I mentioned earlier on about really starting these conversations early so that you don't necessarily create any unrest there about resourcing and times and so on.
Yes. So we do have more questions streaming in. I'll try and just touch quickly on them, and then we have a bit of an offer and a wrap-up slide that we'd like you to see before we go. With regards to the extension products that we've talked about, look, off the OBS website, and I should explain, OBS and Conducive and eSavvy and Intergen are coming together under the banner of Empired. For those who may have received any branding that was inconsistent with Empired in the last month, we're in the process of integrating as a company. On the obs.com.au website, there are links on our partners sublink to some of the products that we've talked about. With regards to records management specifically, RecordPoint is really the premier offering that extends SharePoint as opposed to integrating it, and I would highly recommend taking a look through their website. I believe it's just recordpoint.com, unless I'm mistaken. And you'll also find information with regards to the question that's come through about the different compliance levels that particular tool brings. The answer to your question specifically is that SharePoint is not compliant with any particular RM or information management standard out of the box. It does need to be extended to achieve those compliance states. So with regards to the rest of the third-party offerings, look, we invite you actually to give us a ring and contact us. The ecosystem is expansive, whether we're looking at content assessment and rectification before our project, classification, organization, migration tools, actual RM capabilities or classification capabilities tacked into SharePoint. It is an immense conversation, and there are quite a few players out there in the marketplace.
And an earlier question very early on was asking about online, so the cloud versions of, or the cloud offerings of SharePoint. Many of these products have, we're aware of them, have many of the products have offerings that suit the cloud installations, or certainly a lot of them are bringing them online now. So we can definitely help there if your with advice if your ambition is to move to the cloud or have a hybrid environment. It's a very interesting space. There's a lot of change happening in there at the moment. So we'd love a good conversation around those options.
There is a question that's come through with regards to ownership of document structuring. Is it an IT concern, a business ownership concern? I'd like to hear from AJ on that, but I'd like to chime in my own 2 cents worth with regards to ownership. In an ideal scenario, we move to a federated ownership, where IT does look after the platform from a service mentality and they enable, where business drives the outcomes that the platform is enabling, where RM is satisfied that compliance burdens are being met without impeding the way that people need to work day to day, and in fact, the least involvement that RM has in terms of the way people have to interact with the documents and information, the better, as long as the requirements are being met on the back end. That's what we refer to as transparent records management. Now, how do you get from a single sense of ownership to a federated ownership? That's all about change. That's all a change management process involving training as well as coaching, as well as some pretty fundamental attitudinal changes about understanding that we're working in layered environments here. Just like we mentioned about taxonomies being a multiplicity of taxonomies. Well, the layers of our RM system or our document management solution also can be co-managed by different parties. Everybody has their own sandpit to play in, and they overlap. And it is really important. I guess the best advice we can give in terms of getting to that state of being is to involve people consistently and early in the process as a quorum. Not to the extent of creating burdensome committees, but certainly get your key stakeholders from each of those 3 or 4 areas that we've talked about together in a room, driven by business objectives, to get on the same page, and then you're going to start to move people towards that change capability, and you're going to make it much more palatable, because of course the benefits are built in when you take that particular approach.
Yeah, I'd have to say that I think there still is a role for someone to certainly oversee the ownership of structures, naming conventions, taxonomy, implementations, more from a kind of a first principles approach. So here is our plan. Here is how we will manage things. Here is the patterns we will use to structure these areas to put documents into. I think definitely giving people freedom to work in those areas and not necessarily enforce a naming convention on things, because what we do start to see when there are too many hurdles is it's all too easy to pop out and use a different system. The amount of drop boxes and other systems that people find easier to use because they have more control over them. Often that's the distinction. Not that they're easier to use, it's that they've got more control over them. So try and give people the sense of, or build in a sense of control within the system that they have. But the librarian type person or the ownership person certainly still has a form of authority to go and help continually improve what's already there or remediate what's already there. So it's more of a stewardship type of role, but it definitely is still valid. It just might have to change a little bit in a more modern implementation and ecosystem of just next generation platforms like SharePoint.
The last thing I'll add to that before we close with our offer is very much about this concept of multiplicity of taxonomies. When we're trying to conduct, particularly RM, in a SharePoint context, there are 2 key things that we want to drive home. Approach SharePoint as the work-in-progress landscape for document authoring and creation, and whether you're extending or you're integrating to an existing EDRMS, do so with the goal of having your RM be transparent to the end users. Right? This is critically important. The way that we enable this is through a fundamental understanding of the multiplicity of the taxonomies involved and focusing, and here's the key takeaway. We must focus a considerable amount of energy in the project on ensuring that we have the correct mapping between our compliance-based classification schemes and our functional-based classification schemes, because ultimately making RM transparent in SharePoint is about ensuring that the site and the document library and the metadata, the forms that I'm using to interact with my documents in SharePoint are innately mapped to an appropriate compliance response in the RM system, and that is effectively hard-coded into the way we've configured the SharePoint landscape. So we see here that our logical topology matters in light of our BCS. So we'll finish there. Look, to close out, as we are approaching the 60-minute mark, Empire has decided to extend an offer to participants of the webinar. So within each of our capital cities, and there are some limitations in terms of being within 2 hours of the CBD, we have decided to offer a free consultation, effectively a 2-hour workshop involving a consultant or pre-sales resource from one of our offices. If you are interested in more information about our services, about third-party products, about RM in general, or would like to take advantage of this particular offer to get in front of us for a workshop, we are more than happy to cater for that. Contact us directly through the inquiries line or direct through your local office, and we will be happy to help. And look, AJ and myself are always available to field questions. We're out there in the blogosphere and the ionosphere. I'd like to thank everybody for your attention today. We hope that, although limited in time, that this has at least covered off some interesting points for everybody, provided a little bit of value. And look, we hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you very much.